My name is Charles Devereaux. I'm 72 years old, and for the last 2 years, I've been living as a quiet guest in the life I paid for. Last night, my daughter Simone looked me in the eye and gave me a choice: either become her husband's personal servant or get out of their house. I simply smiled, packed the one suitcase that truly mattered, and left my key on the table. They thought they had won. They have no idea the man they just kicked out is the one person on this earth who holds their entire future in his hands. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever learned that quiet dignity is the most powerful response. It all came to a head in the kitchen. The scent of garlic and rosemary, a fragrance that should have meant comfort, felt like an accusation in that sterile white room. For 47 years, it was the smell that welcomed my Rose home. Now in this kitchen of cold granite and stainless steel, it was the smell of my transgression. The apron Simone had given me for Christmas felt less like a gift and more like a uniform cinched tight around my waist as a constant reminder of my place. I was not a father living with his daughter. I was the help. "I told you, Simone, I'm not eating that." Kevin's voice sliced through the silence, sharp and brittle as broken glass. He dropped his fork onto his plate of shrimp scampi, the clatter echoing off the expensive countertops. The shrimp which I had picked out carefully at the market that morning lay there rejected. "And I am sick," he continued, "of smelling this kind of food in my house." He punctuated the last word with a glare that swept past me and landed on his wife. My daughter, my Simone, stood leaning against the island, her arms crossed. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her husband, her face a mask of anxious apology as if he were the one being wronged. Her shoulders slumped in a gesture I once recognized as weariness but now saw was simple surrender. "You see, Dad," she finally turned to me, her voice stripped of all warmth. "You've upset him. I told you just follow the menu I give you. All you had to do was bake the skinless chicken breast and steam the asparagus. Is that so difficult?" I stayed quiet, studying my daughter's face, searching for the little girl with braids who used to follow me around my workshop, peppering me with questions about blueprints, the girl who once proudly told her friends her daddy was the greatest architect in the world. The woman before me was a stranger. Her eyes, my Rose's eyes, now only reflected the petulance of her husband. Kevin stood, wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, and tossed it on the table. "It's not just about dinner, Simone. It's about respect. This is my home. I have certain standards." He was speaking to her, but every word was a bullet aimed at me. "I know, honey," Simone said quickly. Then she took a deep, deliberate breath. In that moment, I knew what was coming. It was the breath someone takes before they say something they know is cruel but have decided is necessary. She turned to face me fully. "Dad, listen. I love you, but I can't keep living like this. Things have to change. From now on, either—" She paused, choosing her words like weapons. "You serve my husband the way he wants. You cook what he wants to eat. You clean the house the way he likes it. No arguments, no opinions." She let the words hang in the air, then delivered the final blow. "Or you can leave." A familiar pain clenched in my chest. The ache of losing Rose, the sting of loneliness, and now the sharp agony of betrayal. But then something strange happened. The pain receded, replaced by a cold, still calm. It was as if a switch had been flipped deep inside my soul, turning off all the noise. I looked at them. Kevin standing there with a smirk so sure of his victory. Simone avoiding my gaze, her lips pressed into a thin line. They were waiting for me to beg, to promise I'd do better, to accept my diminished role in their lives. And I did something they never saw coming. I smiled. It wasn't a pained or broken smile. It was a genuine, quiet smile of relief. The smile of a man who just heard the click of his own cell door unlocking. The confusion that washed over their faces was immediate, and in that split second, the balance of power in the room shifted for good. "All right, daughter." The two words left my mouth quiet but final. I could see the shock register on Simone's face. Her mouth fell slightly open. She had prepared for a battle, not this swift, unconditional surrender. I gave them no time to recover. I untied the apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. I didn't throw it. I showed no anger. My movements were slow, deliberate. I was taking back control. I turned and walked toward the small room at the end of the hall, the room they called the guest suite, which had been my residence for 2 years. The sound of my footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. Behind me, the kitchen was silent. I could feel their eyes on my back trying to make sense of what was happening. In my room, I reached under the bed and pulled out the old leather suitcase. The hide was worn and scuffed, but the brass latches still gleamed. Rose and I had bought it for our honeymoon in New Orleans 47 years ago. Touching it, I could almost feel the warmth of her hand on mine. I had little to pack. My life here had been stripped down to the essentials. I opened the closet, bypassing the comfortable, shapeless clothes Simone had bought me. The clothes that made me look like a generic retiree. Instead, I carefully took out my one tailored suit, the one I wore to accept the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Institute of Architects. I laid it gently inside the suitcase. I added a few shirts, some socks, then my old sketchbook, its spine soft with age, filled with 50 years of ideas, dreams, and scribbled elevations. It was more valuable to me than any stock or bond. I placed it on top of the suit. Finally, from the nightstand, I took the only framed photograph I kept. Rose smiling under the bougainvillea in our garden, her eyes full of life. I pressed my lips to the cool glass before carefully wrapping the frame in a wool sweater and tucking it securely inside. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. When I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound was an ending. I rolled the suitcase out of the room. Simone and Kevin were still standing there as if frozen in place. The smugness was gone from Kevin's face, replaced by a dawning unease. Simone looked stricken. "Dad, what are you doing?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean... I was just..." "You were perfectly clear, Simone," I interrupted, my voice steady. "You gave me a choice, and I've made it." I walked past them toward the front door, not giving them another glance. I pulled the house key from my pocket. The jangle of the metal sounded foreign in the tense silence. I placed it on the mahogany console table in the entryway, right next to a pile of unopened junk mail. I put my hand on the doorknob. "Where will you go?" Simone's voice was thin now, laced with something that sounded almost like desperation. I paused, but I didn't turn around. "To a place," I said, "where a meal cooked with love isn't considered an insult." And then I opened the door, stepped out into the cool evening air, and pulled it shut behind me. The definitive click of the latch echoed in the quiet street. It was not the sound of exile. It was the sound of freedom. The hotel clerk didn't look up from her screen when she took my credit card. To her, I was just another name for the night, another transaction. Charles Devereaux, room 714. She handed me the plastic key card with practiced indifference. There was a strange comfort in the anonymity. In my daughter's house, I was a problem to be managed. Here I was, nothing, and nothing felt like an improvement. The elevator ride was silent, the soft chime on the 7th floor, the only sound. The hallway was a long, beige corridor of identical doors. It smelled of disinfectant and faint air freshener, a clean that has no history, no memory. I slid the key card into the lock, and the small green light blinked, granting me entry. The room was exactly what you would expect, impersonal. A king-sized bed made with military precision, the white duvet so taut it looked like it would crack if you sat on it. A generic print of a cityscape hung above the headboard, a picture of a place that wasn't here, chosen by someone I would never meet. The curtains were thick, the color of sand, blocking out a world I wasn't ready to face. I rolled my small suitcase over to the luggage rack and stood in the center of the room, feeling the manufactured stillness settle around me. At Simone's, the silence was a weapon filled with unspoken resentments and the tension of a coming storm. Here the silence was simply empty, a void. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't open my suitcase. I walked over to the armchair by the window and sat down, my hands resting on my knees. The city lights of Atlanta spread out below a glittering web of promises and hurried lives. From up here it all looked so orderly, so logical. A grid of streets, a pattern of light. It was a lie, of course. Down there in those buildings and on those streets, life was messy, chaotic, and filled with the kind of pain that doesn't show up on a map. For the first time since I'd walked out Simone's door, the full weight of it hit me. I had left a house. But the truth was, I hadn't felt at home there for a very long time. Home was the smell of roses after a summer rain. Home was the worn spot on the hardwood floor by the fireplace where we used to dance. Home was the sound of her laughter echoing from the kitchen. This sterile palace my daughter lived in, with its silent, judgmental walls and its carefully curated emptiness, it was never my home. It was a beautifully decorated waiting room, and my waiting was finally over. The silence in room 714 was no longer a void. It began to fill up not with noise but with memories, with the faces and voices and choices that had led me to this chair in this room on this night. The questions started to surface. Not angry questions, but quiet, searching ones. When did it start? When did my daughter stop seeing me as her father and start seeing me as an obstacle? When did the foundation of the family Rose and I had so carefully built begin to crack? And as I sat there watching the river of headlights flow down below, I knew I had to go back. Back in my mind to find the place where the first hairline fracture appeared. Because a house, a family, it doesn't just collapse overnight. It weakens slowly, silently, until one final careless word brings the whole thing down. The memory came unbidden, sharp and clear as the day it happened. It was 2 years ago, right after we had buried Rose. Our house felt cavernous and cold without her. The scent of funeral lilies still clung to the air. Simone sat beside me on the sofa, the same sofa where Rose and I had watched our daughter grow up. She took my hand. Her own was cold. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, were red and swollen from crying. "Dad," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you can't stay here alone. It's too much. The memories, the upkeep. You'll be so lonely." I remember nodding, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She was right. Every corner of that house held a ghost. "Please," she begged, tears welling up again. "Come live with us, with me and Kevin. I need you. I can't bear the thought of you being all by yourself." Her tears seemed so real, her concern so genuine. I saw not a grown woman but my little girl, frightened of losing both her parents. And in my own grief, I clung to her offer like a drowning man clings to a raft. It felt like the right thing to do, the only thing to do. We would be a family weathering the storm together. So I agreed. I packed up a few things, locked the door to the home I had built with my own 2 hands, and moved into the guest room of the architectural marvel she and Kevin called home. The shift was subtle at first. A few weeks after I moved in, Simone came to me with a worried look, holding an envelope. "Dad, the property taxes on this place are just astronomical. I don't know how we're going to manage this quarter." I didn't hesitate. I was a father. Fathers provide. I wrote a check, feeling a sense of purpose for the first time in months. A month later, it was Kevin sighing over a glass of wine at the dinner table. "Just a temporary cash flow issue at the firm," he'd said, shaking his head. "Big project, but the client is slow to pay. It's putting a strain on everything." The next day, I covered the grocery bill for the month, a very expensive grocery bill filled with organic produce and imported cheeses I never ate. Then came the conversation about the joint account. Simone presented it as a matter of convenience. "It just makes so much more sense, Dad," she'd explained, her tone bright and efficient. "Instead of us asking you for help here and there, you can just have your pension and Social Security direct deposited. That way you're contributing to the household expenses automatically and we don't have to have these awkward money conversations." I was tired of awkward conversations. I was tired of everything. So I signed the papers. It seemed logical. I was saving money by not maintaining my own home. Of course I should contribute. I was family. Sitting here now in the sterile silence of room 714, the pieces click into place with a horrifying clarity. Her plea wasn't about my loneliness. It was about her mortgage. Her tears weren't for my grief. They were for her bottom line. Kevin's cash flow issues were just the excuse to get their hands on my life's savings. They hadn't invited me into their home. They had acquired an asset. I was not a father being cared for by his loving daughter. I was a walking, breathing revenue stream, a solution to their over-leveraged lifestyle. The realization didn't come with a flash of anger. It arrived as a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. Every act of generosity, every check I wrote, every dollar I transferred had been taken not as a gift, but as an entitlement. The care they offered had a price tag, and I had been paying it all along without ever seeing the bill. But it wasn't just the money. The financial deception was clean, quantifiable. The other theft was messier. It was the slow, steady erosion of my dignity carried out through 1,000 tiny cuts. Sitting in that hotel chair, I let the memories come not as a flood, but as a series of sharp, distinct snapshots. I remembered the first time Kevin saw my portfolio. I had my old drawings laid out on the dining room table one afternoon, the original blueprints for the Southside Community Library, a project that had defined my career. Kevin picked one up, a detailed elevation I had spent a month perfecting. He held it up to the light, squinting. "This is nice, Charles," he'd said, his tone the same one you'd use for a child's macaroni art project. "A very charming little hobby. A hobby. 40 years of my life, the sweat and soul I poured into creating spaces for people, reduced to a charming little hobby." Simone had laughed, a quick, nervous sound. "Oh, Kevin," she'd chirped, "Dad's an amazing artist, isn't he?" She had reframed the insult as a compliment, a neat little trick of hers. Then there was the evening with the television. It was a new system, a smart TV with a dozen different apps, and a remote that looked like the cockpit of a spaceship. I was trying to find a documentary on PBS. I must have pressed the wrong button because the screen went blank. Kevin let out a long theatrical sigh from the sofa. He got up, took the remote from my hand as if I were a toddler, and said, "Look, Charles, it's not that hard. The source button, it's right here. You press it to switch inputs." "See," he spoke slowly, over-enunciating each word. "I am a man who designed buildings with integrated HVAC, electrical, and plumbing systems so complex they would make his head spin." And he was explaining a remote control to me. I had simply nodded. Beside me, Simone patted my arm. "He's just better with technology, Dad. Don't worry about it." And the music. One Sunday afternoon, I put on a Miles Davis record, Kind of Blue. The cool, elegant notes filled the house. It was the music Rose and I had fallen in love to. Kevin walked in from the patio, a pained expression on his face. "Good Lord, what is that racket?" he asked. "It sounds like a cat dying." He turned to Simone. "Can we put on something a little more energetic?" Before I could say a word, Simone was already at the stereo, lifting the needle off the record. The sudden silence was more jarring than his comment. "Kevin just prefers more modern stuff, Dad," she'd said with a placating smile. "You know how he is." Yes, I did know. I knew then, and I knew it with a chilling certainty now. Each time she had been there, not to defend me, but to manage me, to smooth over the disrespect, to repackage the insults as jokes, to make his comfort her priority. It wasn't that he didn't mean it. It was that she had decided his meaning didn't matter as much as his mood. They weren't isolated incidents. It was a pattern. A deliberate, calculated campaign to diminish me, to shrink me down into a harmless, incompetent old man who should be grateful for whatever space they allowed him to occupy. And my daughter, my Simone, she hadn't just watched it happen. She had held the door open for him. The memories left a bitter taste in my mouth, the metallic tang of swallowed pride. I pushed myself out of the armchair, needing to do something, anything, to ground myself in the present. My mind was a storm of past hurts, and I needed an anchor. I needed facts. On the desk beside the generic hotel lamp, my phone lay dark and silent. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen. An instinct sharp and sudden told me to look, to stop remembering and start verifying. I opened my banking app, my fingers moving through the familiar motions. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. My main checking account, where my pension landed like clockwork on the first of every month, looked normal. The balance was lower than it should have been, but I knew where that money had gone. I had given it freely, a willing participant in my own diminishment. But then I saw it. A small line of text beneath my main account, a line I had never noticed before. Linked accounts. And below that, a single entry, supplementary credit card ending in 8422, cardholder C. Devereaux. My heart gave a hard, painful thud against my ribs. I had never applied for a supplementary card. I hadn't held a credit card in my own wallet in over a decade. With a sense of dread, I tapped on the link. The statement loaded a long, scrolling list of transactions. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't groceries or utility bills. It was a litany of their luxury. Versace, $200. The Four Seasons Weekend Getaway, $500. Morton's Steakhouse, $780. Page after page of it, a trail of my money, funding a life I had no part in, all under my name. The dates were the most damning part. A $2,000 shopping spree the same week Kevin had complained about his firm's cash flow. A lavish spa weekend the month Simone had told me with tears in her eyes that the property taxes were breaking them. The sadness I had been feeling, the grief, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by something cold and sharp. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a series of poor choices. This was theft. Calculated, deliberate fraud. They had not just taken my money, they had stolen my name, my signature, my trust. I stared at the glowing screen in the darkened hotel room, the numbers a testament to their deep and profound betrayal. They had not seen me as a father. They had seen me as a line of credit with no limit. The victim in me died in that moment, and the architect, the man who designs, who plans, who builds from a solid foundation, began to draw up a new blueprint. The phone buzzed in my hand, a frantic, angry vibration against my palm. For the past week I had let it ring, letting the calls go to the digital void of voicemail. But now, after seeing the cold, hard proof of their deceit on the banking app, the sound was different. It was no longer the sound of my daughter's manufactured concern. It was the sound of a predator, realizing the prey had just escaped the trap. The screen lit up, illuminating the dark hotel room. The name glowed in crisp white letters, Simone, and beneath it, a small red circle with a number that made me take a sharp breath. 26. 26 missed calls. 14 unread text messages. A week ago, that sight would have filled me with a gnawing anxiety. I would have imagined the worst. Was she okay? Had something happened to Kevin? My mind would have raced with a father's worry, and I would have answered on the first ring, my voice full of concern, ready to soothe whatever manufactured crisis she had created. But that was the old Charles. The Charles who believed in the fiction of his daughter's love. The man sitting in room 714 was someone new. I looked at the screen at the desperate, silent flashing of her name, and I felt nothing but a profound and chilling calm. I saw the calls for what they were. They weren't 26 pleas for my well-being. They were 26 demands for a status report on their missing ATM. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the mortgage payment that was due next week. They were panicked because the man who paid for their dinners at Morton's Steakhouse and their weekend getaways at the Four Seasons had suddenly vanished, and the credit card he hadn't even known he was paying for was likely declined. The buzzing in my hand was not the vibration of love, but the frantic death rattle of their entitlement. My thumb hovered over the green accept icon out of sheer lifelong habit. For a moment I could almost hear her voice, the carefully pitched tone of panic she would use. "Dad, where are you? I've been so worried." It was a lie, a performance, and I was finally ready to leave the theater. I moved my thumb over to the side of the phone and pressed the volume down button. The buzzing stopped. The frantic vibrations ceased. Simone's name continued to flash on the screen, but now it was a silent, powerless plea. I watched it for a moment longer, then calmly turned the phone over, placing it face down on the polished wood of the desk. The flashing light was extinguished. The connection was severed. The power dynamic had shifted. For 2 years, I had answered every time they called. Now they would wait. They would wonder. They would sit in the silence I had created. I was no longer the supporting character in their drama. I was the architect of my own story, and I was just beginning to draw up the plans. The next morning, I put on the suit I had packed. The fabric felt unfamiliar after 2 years of wearing the soft, shapeless clothes of a retiree, but it settled on my shoulders like an old friend. It was armor, and I was going to battle. Lawrence Bishop's office was downtown in a building of granite and glass that spoke of quiet, old money. His firm was one of the most respected in Atlanta, a beacon in the black community for over 40 years. Larry had been my friend for 30 of them. He was the one who had handled our wills, the one who had sat in my kitchen with Rose and me drinking coffee and laughing as we planned for a future that looked so different from this one. He greeted me not with a handshake, but with a firm embrace. "Charles," he said, his deep voice resonating with concern. "I got your message. Come in, sit down. Let's talk." His office was a sanctuary of order. Walls lined with mahogany bookshelves, a large desk made of dark polished wood, and 2 leather armchairs facing each other. A single photograph sat on his desk, him and his wife smiling on a sailboat. It was a room where problems were brought to be dissected and solved. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking how I took it. He already knew. "Before you say a word," he began handing me a mug. "I just want to say, Rose would be raising hell right now. You know she would. She never did suffer fools, especially not entitled ones." I managed a small smile. No, she certainly did not. She would have seen this coming a mile away, Larry. "So tell me," he said, settling into his chair, his friendly demeanor shifting into one of professional focus. "Tell me what's happened." I told him everything. I started with the ultimatum in the kitchen and worked my way backwards through the years of subtle disrespect, the financial contributions disguised as help, And finally, I laid the printed-out credit card statements on his desk. I spoke calmly, factually, like I was describing the structural flaws in a building. The emotion was a low hum beneath the words, but I didn't let it take over. When I finished, Larry was silent for a long moment. He picked up the credit card statements, put on his reading glasses, and read through them page by page. The only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper. When he finally looked up, the warmth was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by the cold, hard anger of a lawyer who has just seen a profound injustice. "Charles," he said, his voice level and dangerous, "this is not a family squabble. Let's be very clear about what we are looking at. What your son-in-law and daughter have done constitutes felony financial fraud and identity theft. They opened a line of credit in your name without your consent and used it for personal enrichment. Legally, this is no different than if a stranger had stolen your wallet." He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We have two paths forward. The first, and the one I would professionally recommend, is that we walk over to the Atlanta Police Department and file a report. We present this evidence, and the district attorney will almost certainly press charges. They could face serious jail time for this." He let that sink in. The image of Simone, my Simone, in a courtroom facing a judge, it made my stomach turn, but I said nothing. "The second path," Larry continued, "is that we handle this as a civil matter for now. We use this evidence as leverage to force their hand, reclaim what they've taken, and legally sever their access to you and your assets permanently." I looked at the statements on the desk, at the proof of their betrayal. The anger was there, cold and sharp, but beneath it was a deep, aching sadness. She was still my daughter. "Filing a police report would destroy her, Larry," I said quietly. "And as much as I hate what she's become, I don't want to be the one to destroy her." "Then what do you want, Charles?" he asked. "This isn't just about getting the money back, is it?" I looked out the window at the city skyline, at the buildings I had helped shape. I had spent my life creating things that were meant to last, things with integrity. This situation required the same approach. "No," I said, turning back to him. "It's not about the money. It's about the foundation. They built their life on a foundation of lies and disrespect. I don't want to demolish the structure and walk away. I want a solution that is more educational. I want them to understand on a fundamental level the true cost of what they have done." Larry leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "An educational solution," he repeated, savoring the words. "Rose always said you were more of a professor than an architect. All right, Charles, let's design a lesson plan. First things first, we freeze everything. I'll make a call to the bank right now and have that card canceled and all joint accounts frozen pending a fraud investigation. They are officially cut off. Step 2, I'll draft a formal letter demanding full repayment within 30 days, or we proceed with criminal charges. It's time to remind them who really holds the power in this family." He picked up his phone, his eyes gleaming with a righteous fire. The architect had found his engineer, and the blueprint was beginning to take shape. After the meeting with Larry, I walked back to my hotel, not with the heavy tread of a victim, but with the measured stride of a man who has just been handed a set of blueprints. The legal machinery was now in motion, a silent, powerful force grinding away in the background. But that was only one part of the foundation. The other part, the part that had been neglected for 2 long years, was me. I needed to reconnect with Charles Devereaux, the architect, not just Charles the father and financial resource. That afternoon, I sat in the armchair by the window, my old leather-bound address book open on my lap. It was filled with names that had shaped skylines and mentored generations. For the first time in a long time, I started making calls. The first was to David Chen in San Francisco, my partner on the Oakland Museum project. We didn't talk about my daughter or my troubles. We talked about cantilevered beams and the way light falls in a room at dusk. We argued good-naturedly about the merits of reinforced concrete versus steel. For 30 minutes, I wasn't a grieving widower or a discarded parent. I was an architect again, engaged in the language I knew best. My mind, which had felt so clouded with hurt, began to clear. The energy started to return. Next, I called Maria Flores, a brilliant young urban planner I had mentored years ago, now working in Miami. She told me about her fight to preserve a historic neighborhood from developers. I listened, offered advice, and felt the old fire in my belly stir. This was the work that mattered. This was the world I belonged to. The calls went on. I spoke with a structural engineer in New York, a landscape architect in Seattle. With each conversation, I was rebuilding myself, reminding myself of a life and an identity that existed completely outside of Simone and Kevin's small, selfish world. The final call of the day was to Elias Vance, an old friend who had retired from architecture to serve on a citizens advisory board for the city of Atlanta. "Charles," he boomed over the phone, "it's good to hear your voice. I was just telling someone the other day, this city hasn't seen a decent public space designed since you hung up your T-square." We laughed, and then his voice turned sour. "Speaking of which, have you seen the proposals for the Riverwood project? It's a disgrace." I kept my voice casual. "No, I've been a bit out of the loop. What's the story?" 3 corporate firms, all proposing the same glass and steel monstrosities. All flash no soul. They want to bulldoze a piece of our history and call it progress. One of them is that big firm Sterling and Finch. Some arrogant young buck named Kevin Sterling is the lead on it, thinks he can slap a green roof on a concrete box and call it sustainable. My heart beat a little faster, but I held my voice steady. "Sterling, you say, doesn't ring a bell." "You're lucky," Elias grumbled. "The only thing standing between him and a wrecking ball is Lena Bird. You remember Lena, don't you? Your star pupil from Georgia Tech, the one who could draw a perfect freehand perspective. She's on the city council now, and she's the deciding vote on the planning commission. She has a spine of steel, thank God. She won't let them desecrate that community without a real fight." I thanked Elias for the update and hung up the phone. I sat in the deepening twilight of the hotel room, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside. The pieces were all there. The arrogant young architect, the historic community threatened with erasure, and the deciding vote, the keeper of the flame, a brilliant woman I had once taught everything I knew about the soul of a building. It was a design problem of perfect, terrible symmetry. And for the first time in 2 years, a slow, knowing smile spread across my face. The victim was gone for good. The architect was back at the drawing board. I let the name settle in my mind. Lena Bird. She hadn't just been my student, she had been a prodigy. A young black woman from the South Side with a fire in her eyes and a mind that saw buildings not as structures but as living, breathing organisms. Rose had adored her. She used to say that Lena, she has a spine made of steel and a heart made of gold. She'll change this city one day. It seemed my wife, as usual, had been right. I found her number in my old address book, her name written in Rose's elegant script. I took a deep breath, not of anxiety but of focus, and dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Dr. Bird speaking." Her voice was the same crisp and professional, but with an underlying warmth I remembered well. "Lena," I said, "it's Charles Devereaux." There was a moment of stunned silence, and then her voice broke into a wide, audible smile. "Professor Devereaux? My goodness. To what do I owe the honor? I was just thinking about you last week. The city is considering a new wing for the library, and I told the committee they should just pull out your original plans and call it a day." I laughed, a genuine chest-deep laugh that felt good. "I think we can do a little better than my 30-year-old drawings, Lena. How are you? How are those 2 boys of yours?" We spoke for a few minutes about her family, about my health, about the quiet ache of life after Rose. She spoke of my wife with such profound respect and affection that it brought a lump to my throat. "Rose was a giant, Charles," she said softly. "I learned as much from her about how to be a woman in a world run by men as I learned from you about the principles of design." The easy warmth of our conversation was the perfect foundation for what I needed to build. "Speaking of design and the city," I said, shifting the tone just slightly, "my old friend Elias Vance was just telling me about the incredible work you're doing on the Planning Commission, the Riverwood project in particular. It sounds like a legacy-defining development for Atlanta." I could hear her sigh over the phone, a sound of deep professional weariness. Legacy-defining or legacy-destroying? That's the question, isn't it, Charles? It's a mess. We have 3 finalists, and honestly, I'm not inspired by any of them. It's all glass boxes and buzzwords. They talk about community, but their designs feel like they could be dropped into any suburb in America. There's no sense of place, no respect for the history of Riverwood. She was saying everything I had hoped she would feel, confirming the weakness in my son-in-law's approach. I didn't have to criticize him. I just had to listen. That's often the challenge with projects of that scale. I offered my tone-thoughtful academic. The balance sheet has a louder voice than the history. They forget that the most important part of a new foundation is understanding the story of the ground it's being built on. A project like Riverwood, It needs someone to speak for the ghosts, for the memories and the struggles that don't show up on a surveyor's map. I let the words hang in the air, a carefully placed beam in our conversational structure. There was a long pause on her end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her brilliant mind. "Speak for the ghosts," she repeated, her voice suddenly electric with a new idea. "Charles, you're a damn genius. That's exactly it. The board is being seduced by shiny renderings and profit margins. They've forgotten what's really at stake. They need perspective. They need a conscience." Another pause, this one shorter, filled with decision. "Charles, what would it take to get you to be that conscience, to come to the final presentation next week, not to compete but to consult, to sit with the commission as our guest expert and give us your unvarnished, honest opinion after the finalists present? Your voice, your legacy. It carries more weight in this city than all three of those firms combined." The plan had worked more perfectly than I could have ever designed. She had invited me. It was her idea. I let out a slow breath, feigning hesitation. "Lena, that's very kind, but I am retired, you know. My public speaking days are mostly behind me." "I'm not asking you to give a speech," she countered quickly. "I'm asking you to tell the truth. For Riverwood. For the city." I allowed another beat of silence to pass. "For you, Lena," I said finally. "And for a project this important, of course. I would be honored." We confirmed the time and date, and after we hung up, I walked to the window of my hotel room. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. The man looking back at me was no longer stooped by grief or diminished by disrespect. His eyes were clear. The architect was back, and he had just laid the cornerstone of his new design. The chamber at Atlanta City Hall was designed to inspire awe. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, and a solemnity that clung to the very air. It was a room built for pronouncements, for decisions that would shape the future. I had been in this room before decades ago, accepting an award for the library project. Today, I was here for a different reason. I wasn't being honored. I was being deployed. Lena had arranged for me to use a small private anteroom reserved for council members. It had a one-way glass window looking out into the main chamber, a perfect vantage point from which to observe the prelude to the performance. I was the ghost in the machine, unseen, waiting for my cue. Down below, the room buzzed with the low hum of anticipatory chatter. I saw Kevin immediately. It was impossible to miss him. He was holding court near the front, dressed in a tailored European suit that was a size too tight and a shade too shiny. He moved with the jittery, over-caffeinated energy of a man who believes he is the center of the universe. He was shaking hands, clapping backs, laughing a fraction too loudly at a councilman's joke. He wasn't preparing. He was performing. His confidence was a cheap suit, and from my vantage point, I could see all the flimsy stitching. He was a hollow man, and today I was going to prove it. And there in the front row was Simone. She was radiant, her face tilted up towards her husband with an expression of pure adoration. She wore a bright red dress, a splash of color in a sea of corporate navy and gray, as if to announce that this was their victory party. She caught his eye and blew him a small, discreet kiss. A wave of profound sadness washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. This was what she had chosen. This hollow man, this hollow life. She was so proud of the very thing that was about to crumble to dust around her. She had traded the solid foundation of her heritage for a penthouse built on sand, and a storm was coming. Then the planning commission members filed in and took their seats at the elevated dais. They were a serious-looking group, men and women of all ages and races, their faces impassive. And in the center, a picture of calm authority, sat Dr. Lena Bird. Her expression was unreadable. She scanned the room, her gaze sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. For a brief second, her eyes flickered towards the window of my room, and she gave a nod so small, so infinitesimal that no one else would have caught it. It was a signal. The stage was set. I turned away from the window and sat down in the leather chair that had been provided for me. I felt no nervousness, no stage fright. The anger that had fueled me for the past weeks had cooled, forged into something harder, more useful purpose. I opened my sketchbook on my lap. It wasn't filled with notes for a speech. It was filled with principles. Quick, sharp drawings of the houses in the Riverwood community, sketches of the faces of the people who lived there, a list of 3 words I had written that morning: dignity, history, soul. That was all I needed. I was not here to destroy my son-in-law. I was here to speak for the ghosts, just as I had told Lena. I was here to defend the soul of a neighborhood they saw only as a blank space on a map. An attendant knocked softly on the door. 5 minutes until the Sterling and Finch presentation, Mr. Devereaux. I nodded. Thank you, I'm ready. The commission chair cleared his throat and the low buzz in the room died down. We will now hear the final proposal for the Riverwood Urban Renewal Project. Representing the firm of Sterling and Finch, Mr. Kevin Sterling. From my small room, I watched on the monitor as my son-in-law strode to the podium. He moved with a practiced, confident swagger, the kind you see in men who have never had to fight for anything truly important in their lives. He arranged his notes, flashed a brilliant white smile at the commission members, and began. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice smooth and amplified by the microphone. "What I'm here to present today is not just a building project. It's a paradigm shift. It is a bold new vision for Atlanta, a vision of synergistic, forward-thinking urban living." Behind him, a massive screen flickered to life. The image was a hyper-realistic 3D rendering of a gleaming complex of glass and steel towers. They were sleek, sharp, and utterly anonymous. They could have been in Dubai or Shanghai or any other city that had traded its soul for a skyline. There was no hint of the warm brick, the sprawling oak trees, or the vibrant living history of the Riverwood neighborhood it was designed to replace. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowed. This wasn't architecture. It was an erasure. Kevin clicked to the next slide. "Our design optimizes the urban footprint," he announced, "by monetizing underutilized spaces and creating a dynamic live work-play ecosystem." I almost scoffed. Underutilized spaces. He was talking about Mrs. Gable's community garden where 3 generations of children had learned to grow tomatoes. He was talking about the basketball court where kids played until the streetlights came on. He wasn't optimizing them. He was paving them over. He spoke for 20 minutes, a cascade of empty corporate jargon. He talked about disrupting the traditional residential model and leveraging smart technology for a seamless lifestyle experience. He pointed to renderings of rooftop pools and state-of-the-art fitness centers. His section on sustainability was the most offensive part. He showed images of buildings with thin veneers of greenery pasted onto their sides, calling them living walls. He talked about LEED certifications and solar panels metrics that could be bought and paid for, but he said nothing about sustaining the actual community, nothing about the families that would be displaced, nothing about the cultural history that would be bulldozed. In his vision, the people of Riverwood were not a community to be integrated, but a problem to be solved, an outdated variable to be deleted from the equation. His renderings told the whole story. The people populating his shiny new world were all young, attractive models of every race, laughing over lattes in sterile cafes. There were no old men sitting on their porches. There were no women hanging laundry in their backyards. There was no life, just lifestyle. Internally, I was deconstructing his every word, every image. I saw the flawed structural logic, the lazy design shortcuts hidden beneath the glossy finish. He was presenting a beautiful hollow shell. And the commission I feared might just be fooled by the polish. Finally, he arrived at his grand finale. The screen showed a final breathtaking shot of the entire complex at sunset, the light glinting off the glass towers, the rooftop pools glowing an electric blue. "This isn't just a development," Kevin declared, his voice swelling with manufactured passion, his arms spread wide as if to embrace his own genius. "It is the future, and Sterling and Finch is ready to build it." He finished holding his pose, a triumphant smile fixed on his face. The room filled with polite, scattered applause. The commission members scribbled notes, their faces giving nothing away. In the front row, I could see Simone, her eyes shining with tears of pride. My son-in-law stood at the podium, basking in the warm glow of the spotlight, soaking in what he believed was his moment of ultimate triumph. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor. And Lena Bird was about to pull the lever. Kevin stood at the podium, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips as the polite applause faded. He looked like a man who had just crossed the finish line in first place, completely unaware that the race had been rigged against him from the start. The commission chair thanked him and opened the floor for questions. "Dr. Bird," the chair said, "do you have anything for Mr. Sterling?" Lena Bird leaned forward toward her microphone, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. A predatory stillness settled over the chamber. "Yes, I do. Thank you," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Mr. Sterling, a very polished presentation. I was particularly interested in your repeated use of the phrase community integration. Your design is slated to be built in a neighborhood with a median age of 68, which is predominantly African American. Could you please direct me to the specific design elements in your proposal that actively integrate these existing residents rather than simply assuming their displacement? Kevin's smile tightened. He was not prepared for this. Well, he began, clearing his throat. We envision a multi-generational synergy. Our ground floor retail spaces and public plazas are designed to be welcoming to everyone. Lena's gaze was unrelenting. Welcoming how your renderings show boutiques selling $500 handbags and cafes serving $12 coffee. Are those the amenities the current residents have been asking for? Because my research shows they have been petitioning the city for a senior wellness center and an accessible grocery store for the past decade. I see you've allocated 10,000 square feet for a luxury pet spa. Could you explain the calculus behind that specific decision? The color began to rise in Kevin's neck. He stammered, talking about market research and attracting a new demographic, but his words were just noise. He had no answer. He had never even considered the question. Lena let him twist in the wind for another moment before delivering the final surgical cut. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. That was very illuminating, she said, the words dripping with ice. She turned her attention to the rest of the commission. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a proposal that lacks a soul. It speaks of the future, but it is deafeningly silent about the past. It's an architecture of erasure. It reminds me... She paused, letting the silence stretch of the kind of superficial, profit-driven design my mentor spent his entire career fighting against. Kevin, attempting to recover, gave a short, dismissive laugh. And who, may I ask, is this esteemed mentor? Lena Bird smiled a slow, dangerous smile. A man whose opinion on this matter I thought the commission deserved to hear directly. At my personal invitation to offer his expert consultation on this project, I'd like to welcome architect Charles Devereaux. The name dropped into the room like a stone into a silent pool. There were murmurs from the older members of the audience, people who knew the name, who knew the legacy. The side door of the chamber opened, and I walked in. I was wearing my suit, the one I had packed in my old leather suitcase. I walked slowly, deliberately, my gaze fixed on the commission. I did not look at my daughter. I did not look at my son-in-law. But I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel the entire room turning the collective intake of breath. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Kevin. His face had gone completely slack, the confident smirk replaced by a mask of gaping, white-faced horror. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. In the front row, Simone had her hand pressed to her lips, her eyes wide with a dawning catastrophic understanding. This was not a coincidence. This was a reckoning. I reached the podium and gave a small nod to Lena. She nodded back. I turned to the commission. Good afternoon, Dr. Bird, members of the commission. Thank you for inviting me. My voice was steady, calm, the voice of a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. Mr. Sterling, I began, gesturing vaguely toward his presentation on the screen, has shown us a series of beautiful images. They are sleek, modern, and expertly rendered, but they are not architecture. They are an advertisement for displacement. I paused, letting the word land. Architecture at its best is a conversation between the past and the future. A good building listens to the whispers of the ground it stands on before it ever tries to shout at the sky. This proposal does not listen, it bulldozes. I didn't need notes. I had lived this my whole life. I look at these plans and I see a profound lack of respect, not for me, but for the community of Riverwood. This is a neighborhood that was born from the ashes of redlining a place where black families built lives of dignity when the rest of the city told them they were not welcome. There is a history in those brick houses, a soul in the shade of those old oak trees that is more valuable than all the glass and steel you could ever manufacture. I looked directly at the commission members. You have been asked to approve a project that will generate tax revenue. I am asking you to consider what it will cost in spirit. You have been shown a vision of luxury. I am asking you to remember the meaning of legacy. I took a breath and delivered my final thought. Any competent firm can construct a building, but an architect, a true architect, has a higher calling. We are tasked with building communities. We are the keepers of memory and the designers of a more just future. A person who erases a community's history to make a profit is not an architect. They are simply a very expensive gravedigger. I finished. The silence in the room was absolute. It was not a polite silence. It was a stunned, heavy silence, the kind that follows a truth so undeniable it leaves no room for argument. And in that silence, I watched the future my son-in-law had so confidently designed for himself, for my daughter, for me, dissolve into thin air. The chamber remained in a state of stunned silence as I walked away from the podium. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for the applause that was just beginning to swell as the commission members found their composure. My part in the performance was over. I nodded once to Lena Bird, a silent acknowledgement of a perfectly executed plan, and headed for the side exit Larry had told me to use. The concrete and steel of the City Hall parking garage felt cold and vast after the warmth and wood of the chamber. My footsteps echoed in the cavernous space. I was halfway to my car when I heard them. "Dad, wait, please." It was Simone's voice, thin and desperate. I stopped but didn't turn around immediately. I took a moment to steel myself to push down the last vestiges of the father who would have once run to that sound and to let the architect, the man with the blueprint, remain in control. I turned slowly. They were running toward me, Kevin's expensive shoes slapping on the oil-stained concrete, Simone stumbling in her heels. They looked undone. Kevin's face was pale and blotchy, his confident swagger completely gone. Simone's makeup was streaked with tears, her bright red dress now looking garish and out of place in the grim fluorescent light. "Dad, please," she sobbed, reaching for my arm. I took a small step back and her hand fell away. "We can explain. You don't understand." "My career is over," Kevin stammered, his voice cracking. "They're going to fire me. Everything we've worked for, it's all gone. You can't do this to us." It was just as I expected. Their apologies, their panic, it wasn't about the pain they had caused me. It was about the consequences they were now facing. Their entire plea was a monument to their own self-interest. I let them finish, let their frantic overlapping excuses fill the cold air until they finally ran out of breath, standing before me like two lost children. When they were done, I said nothing. I simply lifted the leather portfolio I was carrying. My movements were unhurried, my expression calm. "I believe this is what we need to discuss." I said, my voice even and quiet, yet it seemed to cut through their panic like a surgeon's scalpel. I opened the portfolio and took out a thick sheaf of papers neatly bound. It was the document Larry had prepared that morning. I handed it not to Kevin but to Simone. She took it with a trembling hand. "What is this?" she whispered. "That," I said, "is a legally binding repayment agreement for the $24,612.41 that you and your husband fraudulently charged to a credit card opened in my name. Page 2 contains a full itemized list of every transaction. Page 5 is the signature line." I looked from her face to Kevin's. "You have two options. Option 1, you both sign that document, you sell your second car, your designer watches whatever you must, and you repay every single cent within 60 days. If you do that, the matter is closed. Option 2, you refuse to sign. And tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., this entire file, along with my sworn testimony, will be delivered to the Fulton County District Attorney, at which point this will no longer be a family matter. It will be a criminal one. The choice is entirely yours." They stared at the papers as if they were a coiled snake. Simone's face was ashen. I could see her mind racing, processing the inescapable logic of the trap. But I wasn't finished. "There is one more thing," I said. "My realtor will be calling you on Monday to schedule an appointment. She'll need access to the house to take photographs." Simone looked up, her eyes wide with confusion and a new kind of dread. "The house, why?" "Because it's going on the market at the end of the month." I stated not as a threat but as a simple, unchangeable fact. But where will we live?" She cried the question, a pathetic wail in the empty garage. I looked at my daughter, at the stranger standing before me, and for the first time I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a quiet finality. "That," I said, "is no longer my concern. The proceeds will be used to establish the Rose Devereaux Educational Trust for future generations." I then turned and without another word walked toward my car, leaving them standing under the harsh, unforgiving lights holding the blueprint of their own destruction in their hands. The architect had completed his work. 3 months. It's remarkable how a single season can shift the entire landscape of a life. The world outside my window had moved from the lush green of late summer to the crisp gold of autumn, and my own world had changed with it. I sold the house I had built with Rose. The closing was quiet and impersonal, a transfer of paper that felt strangely distant. Simone and Kevin had signed the repayment agreement and moved into a much smaller rental across town, their silence a testament to their shame and the legal power Larry now held over them. I didn't gloat. I didn't even think about them much. My energy was focused on building, not demolishing. My new home was a modern apartment on the 23rd floor, a place I had chosen for the light. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the organized chaos of my life. Books on architecture and history were stacked on every surface. Rolls of blueprints leaned in the corners. My old drafting table, which had been in storage for 2 years, now stood proudly by the window, its surface covered with fresh sketches. The air smelled of coffee and graphite and possibility. This was not a guest room. This was a studio, a workshop, a life. It was a space that belonged wholly to me. I was sitting at that table sketching an idea for a new kind of community park when my phone rang. For a moment, a phantom anxiety fluttered in my chest, a leftover reflex from a time when a ringing phone meant a new demand, a new crisis. But when I looked at the screen, I smiled. The caller ID read, Dr. Lena Bird. "Charles," she said, her voice warm and energetic, dispensing with formalities. "I have good news. The commission officially and unanimously rejected the Sterling and Finch proposal this morning. It's done." I felt a quiet sense of finality, of a chapter closing for good. "That is good news, Lena," I said. "Thank you for letting me know." "Oh, that's not the good news, Charles," she laughed. "That was just clearing the table. The real news is that the commission also passed my motion. We are starting the process for the Riverwood project over from scratch, and they have formally approved the budget to retain you as the senior design consultant to oversee the entire process. The job is yours, Professor, if you still want it." I looked around my sun-drenched apartment at the sketches on my table, at the city skyline stretching out before me. For 2 years, my world had been shrinking, closing in on me, until it was the size of a single room in someone else's house. Now it was expanding again, wide and full of purpose. I was not being asked to be a figurehead or a symbol. I was being asked to do the work I was born to do. "Lena," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't felt in a very long time. "It would be my honor." After we hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the city of Atlanta, a city of brick and steel, of memory and dreams, a city I had helped to build. For so long I had seen myself only in relation to others. Rose's husband, Simone's father, Kevin's problem. I had forgotten the man who stood alone, the man who could look at an empty plot of land and see a library, a community, a home. I picked up my sketchbook and a soft leaded pencil. The view from my window was magnificent, a complex tapestry of structures and lives. And as the afternoon light slanted across the page, I began to draw. A small, peaceful smile touched my lips. The pain was in the past. The betrayals were settled. My legacy was not just something to be protected. It was something that was still growing, still reaching for the sky. The architect was home. This journey taught me a fundamental lesson. Your value does not diminish just because someone close to you fails to see it. For too long, I confused providing for my family with giving them permission to define my life. I learned that the love of a parent should never be a blank check for disrespect. The most important structure I ever designed was not a building, but the firm boundaries I finally drew to protect my own peace and dignity. True strength isn't found in loud arguments, but in the quiet, resolute act of reclaiming your own blueprint. If you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your own dignity, share your story in the comments below.